Answer, and the first question stands in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he have confidence in his Minister for the Rugby World Cup and in his Minister's handling of the government's relationship with the Auckland Council?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes and yes.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it acceptable that the Minister for the Rugby World Cup failed to tell Mayor Len Brown that the government was about to seize extended control of the waterfront in an unprecedented takeover?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that the officials had been working together on this from both the Council and the Rugby World Cup Minister's Office. From the weekend, actually, there was an assumption that Neville Harris had spoken to Len Brown's Chief of Staff, Doug Mackay, an assumption that the Mayor knew. Obviously, that turns out wasn't the case. My understanding is that it's a shame that phone call didn't take place, but as soon as the Minister understood that wasn't the case, then he rang quickly.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then what is his response to Brian Rudman, who wrote in the Herald, quote...
Order. Dr. Russel Norman.
What is his response to Brian Rudman, who wrote in the New Zealand Herald, and I quote, Mr McCulley and Mr Key have not just demonstrated their contempt for the city's leadership, they have deliberately humiliated the Mayor and shown how hollow their talk of partnership was.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I don't believe that to be correct assessment by Mr Rudman. What I would say is that what was demonstrated on Friday night was a situation where an enormous number of people went down to the waterfront or attempted to use Auckland transport, and at some point, for some people, that failed. It's unacceptable and it has to be fixed.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he agree that the best outcome for the Rugby World Cup celebrations will be achieved...
Order. Can I apologise to the member? I say to the National Party backbench on this occasion, please, Dr. Russel Norman has every right to ask his question. Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he agree that the best outcome for the Rugby World Cup celebrations will be achieved by a collaborative approach by all parties involved, and that the constructive partnership with Auckland is being sabotaged by his minister's unilateral approach?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, I don't agree with that last point.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is it not common courtesy when throwing a party in someone else's home to work closely and constructively with the hosts, in this case the people of Auckland, represented by their democratically elected council?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I believe that's happening. As I said, the officials from the Rugby World Cup Minister's Office and the Auckland officials have been working collaboratively, not only on this project for a long period of time, but actually over the weekend.
Dr. Russel Norman.
What specific action did Auckland Council not agree to that justifies this unprecedented government takeover?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, I don't think the member, with all due respect, actually understands the empowering legislation. The legislation is required, and the use of the government's place in that legislation is required in order to get those consents in a time frame which would allow Captain Cook Wharf to be used as a backup facility by Friday night.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was asking specifically what actions did the Council not agree to? I appreciate the Prime Minister's framing of the issue, but it's what are the actions Auckland Council didn't agree to? The
Well, as I understood the Prime Minister's answer, he indicated it's not a matter of specific actions not being agreed to, a matter of some urgency. I think the Prime Minister indicated in his answer was the relevant issue, and I think he's entitled to do that, to indicate that what was implied in the question is not in his view the relevant issue. Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How can this government or any other lay the blame for the failure of public transport on the Auckland Council when, as Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse said this morning on Radio New Zealand, that 6 years ago every mayor in Auckland flew to Wellington to try to get central government to increase investment in public transport, but were ignored by both that government and this government, who delayed further electrification.
Order. I must be able to hear Dr. Norman's question. Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can he lay the blame for the failure of public transport with the Auckland Council when Deputy Mayor Penny Hull said on Radio New Zealand this morning, 6 years ago every mayor in Auckland flew to Wellington to try to get central government to increase investment in public transport, but we're ignored by both that government and this government. And isn't it time that this government called a truce in the war on Auckland?
Order. I apologise, Member, but I just can't hear the last. When we get to a certain point in the question, the interjections on my left mean I just can't hear the last part of the question. I'm going to invite Dr. Norman to start again, and I hope the House is sufficiently sick of hearing the question to be sufficiently quiet for the Prime Minister to hear the question. Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can he lay the blame for the failure of public transport with the Auckland Council when, as Deputy Mayor Penny Hull said this morning on Radio New Zealand, 6 years ago every mayor in Auckland flew to Wellington to try to get central government to increase investment in public transport, but we're ignored both by that government and this government, who delayed further electrification? And when will his government end the war on Auckland and get on with building a decent public transport system?
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, I'd invite you to rule whether there's any irony in that question, and if it is, to rule it out.
The question, as far as I'm concerned, meets the standing orders. I can't be a judge of the accuracy in any question, and I didn't detect any undue irony in it. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I find myself in the incredible position I never thought I'd find myself in, and that's in total agreement with Trevor Mallard. What nonsense.
Question number 2, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.